President Trump gives a rare address from the Oval Office to reassure the American public on the cost of living and his agenda going forward to try to make life more affordable. Will it work? Plus, as 2025 comes to a close, what have we learned about the Trump presidency and how the second term is different from his first? Why is he down in the polls? And what has to happen for him to stage a comeback before the midterm elections?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Those are our subjects for today on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of Wall Street Journal Opinion. Thank you for listening. I'm Paul Gigot, and today I'm joined by Matt Continetti, columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and our new Free Expression newsletter. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the Trump speech from the Oval Office Wednesday evening. Rather extraordinary that he would address the American people on this subject in December. The purpose was obviously to try to reverse the perception among voters that he's out of touch on prices and the cost of living. Let's listen to an excerpt.
Here at home, we're bringing our economy back from the brink of ruin. The last administration and their allies in Congress looted our treasury for trillions of dollars, driving up prices and everything at levels never seen before. I am bringing those high prices down and bringing them down very fast. Let's look at the facts. Under the Biden administration, car prices rose 22% and in many states 30% or more. Gasoline rose 30 to 50%. Hotel rates rose 37%. Airfares rose 31%. Now, under our leadership, they are all coming down and coming down fast. Democrat politicians also sent the cost of groceries soaring, but we are solving that too. The price of a Thanksgiving turkey was down 33% compared to the Biden last year. The price of eggs is down 82% since March, and everything else is falling rapidly. And it's not done yet, but boy, are we making progress. Nobody can believe what's going on.
Well, I guess that's the fundamental question. Do people believe what is going on, and who do they believe? The blizzard of statistics, or what they are seeing in with their own eyes and their own pocketbooks? Matt, what do you think about the address? Did it succeed on its own terms?
Well, I thought the address was interesting for a couple reasons, Paul. The first is that it was delivered at all, which suggests the White House was not entirely satisfied with President Trump's performance in Pennsylvania last week. That was supposed to be the kind of pivot toward a more economic message. And that was followed just the other day by J.D. Vance, also in Pennsylvania, who was more, I think, on message about how the Trump administration is trying to tackle high prices as best they can. Now we have this third speech. What was notable about it, other than its existence, was the fact that the word hoax never appeared. So typically when Donald Trump is asked about affordability, he kind of goes into a monologue about how it's a hoax perpetrated by the Democrats. He's not saying there's a hoax. Instead, he's saying that prices are coming down. The problem with that message is the idea of net gains and losses, which is that because inflation is cumulative, even if prices are coming down compared to where they were, they're still not decreasing to the point where they were when Biden took office. And in fact, we don't really even want that sort of disinflation to happen, because typically that's a sign of a global recession or depression. What Trump needs to do is focus on one line, I think, in his speech. And that's the line that you also hear economic advisor Kevin Hassett say a lot, which is that at the end of the Biden administration, average Americans were down about $3,000 in lost wages thanks to inflation. And since Trump took office, they've gained back about $1,000 of that. That means that there's still $2,000 in the hole. And in order for Trump and the Republicans to be in a good situation for the midterms, they need to make up that extra $2,000 and then some for Americans to really feel good about the economy.
Yeah, what we don't want is deflation, but we do want disinflation, which is a slower pace of rising prices, because you can't go to zero overnight. And the trouble, I think, one of the problems in the first year here has been we haven't seen the disinflation continue at a rapid rate. It's kind of inflation has stayed at about 3% year over year, which is still too high. Now, the report that came out Thursday has it down in the last 12 months to 2.7%. The data, because of the shutdown, is a little messy, a little murky. So we don't know if, how much we can trust that. But that's a bit of good news. But your point about real wages, I think, is the key one there. And we had another report on Thursday that came out that showed that real average earnings across the country for the last 12 months have only risen 0.8%. That just isn't going to cut it to make people feel like, oh, I'm better off. This is better than Biden. And I think that that's part of the problem, particularly since a year ago, November 2024, real wages rose for the previous 12 months 1.4%. Of course, they had been crushed in the first 3 years of the Biden presidency, as you said. That's what people really hated, and that's why Donald Trump won, in my view. And that's why this is such an important issue for him. The other thing I just would point out, I wonder what your reaction is here. Tonally, the speech was kind of weird. Trump almost looked hyper caffeinated. Sometimes he was almost shouting at the American people there. And one of my colleagues suggested, based on her reporting, that Trump didn't want to give this address, but he was persuaded to do so by his advisors, who said, you've got to show people you're really concerned about this because the polls don't look good.
Well, we know Trump doesn't like to stick to the script. Right. I mean, for me, the signal moment came in early in his first term when he went to West Virginia to try to sell the tax reform plan authored by former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And Trump started the set piece speech that his aides had written for him. And then about 5 minutes in said, you know what? This is boring. You don't want to hear this speech, and threw it behind him in the air and just ad-libbed for the rest of the hour or so that he spoke. That's where Trump is most comfortable. So you could tell that he was slightly uncomfortable, and the tone when he reads off a teleprompter tends to be kind of this almost very monotone kind of level of volume, which is unusual for Trump, who when he's not stuck to his script, is very dynamic. But again, I think that reinforces the point that he was convinced, even reluctantly convinced. He does understand that right now his presidency is at risk, and he needs to make up ground in the public approval ratings to have any chance of the Republicans maintaining the House next November.
I wonder if there was big in capital letters across the first page saying, whatever you do, sir, don't use the word hoax about affordability.
And it worked.
The one other thing that intrigued me about this speech was its focus on immigration, which he took credit for closing the border, deservedly so, after the Biden debacle there. But let's listen to him talk about immigration and housing prices, which is a concern among voters.
A major factor in driving up housing costs was the colossal border invasion. We have never been invaded. This is the worst thing that, frankly, in my opinion, the worst thing that the Biden administration did to our country is the invasion at the border. The last administration and their allies in Congress brought in millions and millions of migrants and gave them taxpayer-funded housing while your rent and housing costs skyrocketed. Over 60% of growth in the rental market came from foreign migrants. At the same time, illegal aliens stole American jobs and flooded emergency rooms, getting free health care and education paid for by you, the American taxpayer.
Interesting linkage there. I'm not sure that the average migrant who came from Guatemala rushed to go buy a home and therefore bid up housing prices. In my experience, they tend to live with family members when they come here, or many of them were living in hotels
Right.
that were set up, or they were living in, or they join together in big bunches and live in a rental home or something like that. But economics aside, the politics of this are interesting to me because it suggests, and the way he started, by hitting immigration too, and hit by immigration so hard. I think this is part of their strategy for the midterms. They're gonna run on immigration again, and I wonder if you think that's a good idea.
Well, remember in 2018, Trump made an issue of the migrant caravans approaching the southern border, and so tried once again to use immigration as a way to maintain the Congress for Republicans. It didn't work. I'm not sure it would work this time as well. There's a paradox in the politics of border security, and that is the better you do in securing the border, the more immigration recedes as an issue. And I think we found that in the first year of the Trump administration. High prices and the Biden spending and inflation certainly were top of mind for most voters, but right next to inflation was immigration and the migrant crisis. Trump has, I think, taken steps that have effectively sealed the border and really staunched the flow of illegal migration. However, whatever political gains he's going to reap from that success, I think he's already pocketed. And so right now he needs to focus more on inflation. Will tying the issues work in the same way that, say, tying illegal immigration to terrorism and national security works for this president? I'm not sure. I mean, as you point out, the economics of this are kind of murky at best. I noticed that Vice President Vance used the same line of attack in his speech in Pennsylvania. And of course, I think most conservatives would reply that the real issue here in the housing prices is twofold. One is a lack of supply and regulations that limit the supply. Thus, of course, with fixed supply, the demand will drive up the price. And then the other issue is, again, the inflation, which really led to a spike in interest rates for fixed rate mortgages. That's what I think the administration ought to be tackling, rather than trying to convince voters that there's some connection between the mass immigration and the high housing prices.
I agree very much with that. We'll see if they start to make that case. The president did kind of front run a housing agenda, he said, in the new year. We'll see what that is. So the other thing that came through in the speech is just make this point, is that he promises 2026 is going to be the greatest year ever for the economy. And he's basically making a bet that the incentives for growth, such as they are in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, are going to essentially swamp the negative impact that his tariffs have had. And I'm not sure that they will. I can't say one way or another. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And of course, what happens with the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court rules his emergency tariffs illegal, how does Trump respond to that? But let's step back across Trump's first year here. We're almost at a year end. What has struck you most about Trump this year versus particularly the first term, as he tries to he tries to make his mark on history?
Sure. The first thing that strikes me is the lack of restraint. Trump, of course, has that over-the-top personality that's been a fixture of American politics for the last decade. But in this second term, he has no one saying no to him. He has advisors who might counsel different directions, or in the case of this affordability speech, make a hard case that he needs to do something. But if he has an idea or an initiative, there's no one suggesting, Mr. President, let's not do it. And that's most visible in the way he's remodeled the presidency, not just the powers of the presidency, which he has extended to their utmost, and in some cases, probably beyond that, but the physical manifestation of the presidency, the White House. You look at how he just tore down the East Wing, right, and to build his big, beautiful ballroom. You look at the Oval Office, which has completely transformed with images and portraits of presidents. There's got a copy of the Declaration of Independence there. Of course, gilded with gold in every direction. You see this walkway of presidents, I think he's calling it, with the pictures of his predecessors, with notations in many cases written by Donald Trump himself. I know the Journal did that wonderful ranking of presidents about 20 years ago. This is the Donald J. Trump ranking of presidents. Not to spoil anything, Paul, but Trump comes up on top in his ranking. He's number one. So that's the first thing. He is without restraint, and I think there's a danger of hubris there. The second thing I'd say is he is, in many cases, ignoring the successes of his first term. And I think in particular in international economics and in foreign policy, and to some extent in the judiciary as well. When he came into office in the first term, not having a large team of advisors or experts surrounding him meant that Donald Trump relied quite a bit on the conservative movement as it existed around 2014, 2015. And I actually think that contributed to a lot of his success, not just the tax bill in 2017, but also his maximum pressure campaign against Iran, the I think, much more systematic confrontational approach toward the People's Republic of China. And then, of course, on the judiciary, working with the Federalist Society, not just to replace Justice Scalia and then the two subsequent Supreme Court appointments, but a whole bevy of federal appeals court and district court appointments as well, transforming the federal judiciary in an originalist direction. Well, now we look at this term to date. The One Big Beautiful Bill had, I thought, quite a few important reforms in it, but there's nothing left in the cupboard in terms of supply side pro-growth legislation, or at least not in the cupboard right now, as far as I can tell. On China, it's a very different direction. And rather than using trade policy as another tool in America's competition with China, Trump has unleashed these Liberation Day tariffs across the world. As he said just again last night, tariff is his favorite word. And then I'm looking at the judiciary as well. There are many district court seats that haven't been filled, that don't even have a nominee. I sense a kind of paralysis in the judicial placement machinery in the White House because Trump has turned against the Federalist Society. He's turned against experts on national security, such as Pompeo. And other than a few of our friends, the supply siders are kind of shut out as well.
Let's start with the judiciary point, because I think it is fascinating. I agree with you. It was one of his signal successes in the first term, and I think was something that people who might have had doubts about voting for Donald Trump the second term could say, oh, well, see, that worked great, and changed the Supreme Court. And Trump ran on that. He said, look what I did. And rightly so. But this time, he's now Leonard Leo, formerly the Federalist Society, is now somehow got on the bad side of Donald Trump. He's ostracized. He's got a new kind of favorite legal group led by Mike Davis. And their priority seems to be fundamentally whatever you rule for Trump. It's not originalist. It's not people who look at the law squarely instead of politics. It's, are you ruling for Trump or against Trump? And that's the only thing that they really think is what you're looking for in a judge. And that's part of the problem. So you have on district court judges, of course, you get this blue slip issue where the home state senator, often a Democrat, has to sign off under Senate decorum. And they just won't sign off on some of these judges who seem to be picked not because they are judges, but because they are just good judges because they're loyal to Trump. And I think that's been a mistake, a lost opportunity for Trump. On the supply side stuff, I mean, I think it's, they had expensing in the immediate expensing in the bill. That's good. That will come through. There's a lot of deregulation flowing through the agencies, and that, I think, is pro-growth. But in tax policy, there's really no rate cuts at all. And if anything, Trump is reversing the 30 years of 40 years 50 years of tax reform thinking by saying instead of simplification and lowering rates, Trump is saying favor to him. Oh, no tax on tips. Favor to seniors. He's picking out parts of the tax code to for individual constituencies. And that doesn't do much for growth, in my opinion. So that's another thing that I think maybe here a question mark as he goes into 2026 saying we're going to have a boom. And I think the echoes, you're too young to remember this, Matthew, but I know you've read about it. But I was there, in 1983, after the 82 recession, Reagan had passed his tax bill in 81. And in 83, January 1st, the net tax cut hit and boom, we had a boom. And that carried through to re-election and through the rest of the 80s. I'm not sure we're going to get the same kind of impact from the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Well, it's interesting, too, because the elements of the One Big Beautiful Bill that he's emphasized, J.D. Vance emphasized, and Treasury Secretary Bessent have emphasized are really kind of on the demand side, because they're talking about, well, just wait, you're going to get these big tax refunds next year, everybody. And, you're going to be able to deduct the interest on your car loan if you buy American. It's different from the classic supply side argument that we're not going to fiddle with demand. We are going to change the incentives for investment and savings in order to get a rush of productivity. So there's some of that, as you say, in the bill, but really what Trump and his team they're focusing much more on demand management, even on affordability. I was struck that they're talking about, they're really bashing pharma and saying, well, look, we're driving down the prices of prescription drugs. That's going to have unintended consequences in terms of shortages and a lack of R&D that this administration, I think, isn't paying attention to because they are really in this race against time. They want some short-term boost in growth and in spending and in kind of the sentiment of consumers in the next 10 and a half months so that they can get through the midterm.
Has Donald Trump changed the Republican Party into essentially a big government party? When you look at the things that he is doing, buying stakes in companies, for example, endorsing price controls on drugs, pursuing out of RFK Jr. in the HHS, basically saying we want to take vaccines off of this program that limits liability and make it open season for the trial lawyers to go after pharma. Yeah. Now, there are counter indications to that point on deregulation, for example, especially financial deregulation. But there's an awful lot of Trump's ideas that could be very comfortable in an Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders White House.
Yeah. And, even in his dealings with the universities, which I agree with, he's still exercising state power in order to achieve a policy goal or a political goal, which is kind of classic progressivism. I think, the Republican Party is in the midst of a mass confusion. And we saw that in the House this week with these 4 Republicans who are very worried about their futures in the House next year. They come from swing districts in New York, 1 in New York, 3 in Pennsylvania. They're siding with the Democrats, voting for signing on to a discharge position to force a vote on the Democratic extension of Obamacare subsidies with no strings attached. That's incredible to me. And I think it's simply because Republicans don't know they don't have a sense of their principles any longer. Now, there are a lot who do, and that's why we're probably not going to see an extension of these Obamacare subsidies. But they're also not getting any direction from the president, who I think is trying to avoid taking a firm stand because he's worried about any political blowback if the subsidies expire and people who are on the Obamacare exchanges see their premiums rise exorbitantly. But to me, this just reinforces what happens when you drop principle and instead tie yourself to a personality. And because you're going to be at the whim of that personality, and you're also going to lose any sense of what you stand for as a movement or a political party.
And the Republican Party will have to have a major debate about what direction it's going to take going into 2028. But let's go back to the first year. What do you think is the best decision Trump made?
Well, the best decision Trump made was to intervene in the Middle East and to bomb the Iranian nuclear program. Operation Midnight Hammer was I think, a blow for American interests. I mean, a blow in support of American interests, a blow against Iran. Right. It was long overdue. It was something that had been discussed and debated for 2 decades, and Trump did it. And I think at the least massively set back the Iranian nuclear program. So that's at the top of my list of his achievements. And then, of course, he followed it on with another significant achievement, which is the return of the hostages. There's one dead hostage whose remains are still in Gaza. That's Hamas violating the ceasefire agreement. But the return of all the living hostages to Israel, I think, is up there with destroying the Iranian nuclear sites.
I wish I had another idea on the best thing he did, but that was exactly mine: bombing the Iranian nuclear sites. And I don't think Biden would have done it. Yeah. Harris would not have done it, and I don't think George W. Bush would have done it. And I'm not sure any recent president, frankly, would have. So that is something that Trump was willing to do, and I think you got to give him credit for that. And I think it did go certainly some way to reestablishing deterrence, not all the way, that had been so degraded under the Biden-Obama years. So what's the best decision Trump has made?
You mean the worst decision?
Excuse me, the worst decision.
Yeah,
Sorry.
So,
What's the worst decision?
So I'd say the worst policy moment was his continual refusal to comply with the law banning TikTok from the United States. This was a law that bipartisan majorities of Congress passed, that was upheld by the Supreme Court, and it is expressly in the bill passed by Congress that unless certain deadlines were met, TikTok should be forbidden. And Trump has just ignored that law. I think that from a policy standpoint, that's in my view, the worst decision he's made.
Yeah, the listeners will probably say, "Oh, well, Gigot is going to say tariffs for the worst decision." It's up there, and it's the most damaging economically. But I'm going to say it's a related rule of law point, and it is the use of unleashing the Justice Department and agencies as tools of personal retribution. I mean, you saw it in the Vanity Fair interview. Susie Wiles told the truth and said, "Yeah, it's retribution." I mean, you could see it. Everybody knows that, and Trump is, I guess, more or less admitted that in some instances. But going after his political enemies, I mean, going after law firms that may have tilted left in some of their staffing, and basically saying, "We are going after them because they went after me." That is, I think, a gross abuse of power. Now, the courts have slapped that down, but nonetheless, that hangs in the air over so many of the president's decisions. And we'll see how his cases, a couple have already been thrown out against James Comey and Letitia James, the New York Attorney General. We'll see how the rest turn out. But, particularly going after John Bolton, who served him well and just became a critic later, strikes me as Trump will point to the Biden presidency and saying, "See, they went after me." All true, all true. I think it helped him regain the White House, frankly. And I think when you then try to continue this cycle of retribution, I think it's going to work against him and the Republicans.
Well, if we're going to escape this lawfare, it's going to take an act of restraint on the part of one side. And if there's one thing we know about President Trump, restraint is not his strong suit. Unfortunately, though, that means that lawfare is going to persevere when the Democrats returned to power. And I noticed this week that Gavin Newsom, the California's governor, and right there at the top of potential Democratic contenders in 2028, posted to social media an AI-generated photo of Trump in handcuffs. And so that gives you a sense of where the Democratic base is, what the demands will be on any future Democratic president. At some point, one of our two parties is just going to have to be the adult in the room and say enough of this lawfare. But we're nowhere near that point, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are nowhere near that. I think we will leave it there today. Much more to talk about as the Trump presidency reaches the end of its first year and moves into a midterm election year. Thanks, Matthew Continetti, for being here. And thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch.